So I've decided to switch things up a bit, and instead of doing a June reading wrap up, I'm going to start doing monthly happy videos. So it is going to be a reading wrap up. I'm going to share the books that I read, but I'm also going to share all the things that made me happy around that idea of story. So it could be a video that contains more than just books. It could involve trips out or settings, or just story coming into my life in other ways. So this is the very first happies video. So this is my June happies. When I look back over my June on BookTube, there are some significant moments in June that really made me happy. One of the key ones is following up my reading on Maggie O'Farrell's Hamnet, which I read a few months ago. I loved this book. I live just outside of Stratford upon Avon. I have a yearly pass for unlimited access to all the Shakespeare houses. So I decided in June to take you on a Anne Hathaway adventure. I'm not going to call it a Shakespeare adventure because of course Shakespeare isn't named in this book, so I'm going to call it my Anne Hathaway adventure. And it was just wonderful to walk through the book and to just experience the book via the settings. What I also discovered doing that in June was that the graves of the twins, Hamnet and Judith, weren't marked in the graveyard at Holy Trinity Church in Stratford, where all of Shakespeare's family is buried. So there are 5 members of the family buried inside the church. However, the twins are outside the church. And I found out through talking to the staff that Maggie O'Farrell campaigned with the vicar to get the graves of the twins marked somewhere in the graveyard, and they have recently planted 2 rowan trees with plaques for both Judith and Hamnet, and it was just so amazing to track those grave sites and markings down. It was a really emotional 2 days I spent exploring Stratford and filming in Stratford, and I loved it. And I think it connects you so strongly to something you've read when you do that, when you give it time, when you visit settings where you can. For me, it made Hamnet just really part of my soul, so that was just a wonderful thing in June. Because I was in Stratford so much, I also discovered some new bookshops in Stratford. So the key bookshop that I shopped in was the Shakespeare Hospice bookshop, and I shared a haul from that. So there's been new books, which has been fantastic. It's definitely made me want to finish my books about Anne Hathaway, so it's put those up the priority list. So it's kind of shaped what I want to read next, and I think that's a lovely way for TBRs to grow organically as we interact with the books we read. So another really key part of June as well was another visit out to the village of Burford, which is mentioned in Elizabeth Gaskell's Lois the Witch, which was a book that I read for a readathon. Now in June I took part in 2 readathons, a read-along and also 2 challenges. So Lois the Witch was read taking part in Katie's 10 years of books and things readathon. So Katie's challenge in June was to read 1 classic book and 1 book of historical fiction. So historical fiction, writing about the witch trials. Lois the Witch is Elizabeth Gaskell's historical fiction. It is a novella. It is about 100 pages long, and I read that as part of Katie's readathon. In here the village of Burford is mentioned, so I went to visit Burford Church and I uploaded a video which I loved making, where I actually tracked down the rooms mentioned in this book and also walk in the footsteps of Elizabeth Gaskell, because she went to school in Burford. So I loved bringing that video as well to BookTube. But I didn't start in June with this Elizabeth Gaskell, I actually started with North and South because Katie had recommended that this is the best place to start. So I decided to read North and South first, followed by Lois the Witch. I loved North and South. I loved the love story in here. I loved the depiction of the industrial north as opposed to the south of England. Some really fantastic aspects in this book. Some very cinematic scenes as well. Definitely around the love story and the idea of striking and factory working in Victorian times. Some of those tension scenes with the strikes going on interspersed with a developing love story were just so cinematic. I could imagine them playing out on the big screen. So this felt incredibly cinematic to me to read. And Lois the Witch as well, I loved them. I loved both of these books. I think Elizabeth Gaskell's writing is absolutely fabulous. So I read those two, but the other book that I read for Katie's 10 years of books and things readathon was the my very first Anthony Trollope book, Dr. Whortle's School. Again, I loved this as well. So a school headmaster or school owner who's kind of caught up in a morality story and scandal of a member of his staff and what happens to his school as part of that. Really good depictions of reputation in the Victorian era and what happens when your reputation can fail. Just a really interesting look at work, marriage, love, reputation, scandal, and the knock-on effects of that for people's income and livelihood. So I loved this. I'm definitely keen to read some more Anthony Trollope. So the idea behind this was to read two of Katie's top favourite authors, Elizabeth Gaskell and Anthony Trollope. So those were my first three reads in June and I loved them. Another read along that I took part in is Jen the Librarian's Thomas Hardy read along, where we're reading every Thomas Hardy book in publication order. It started last month. We read Desperate Remedies in June. This is Thomas Hardy's first book that he ever published, and I read a lot of this book sitting in Anne Hathaway's garden because I was in Stratford quite a lot, and I just decided to go and spend time sitting in the garden on the hottest days of the year. But I sat underneath these beautiful trees looking at this woodland in absolute silence, listening to all the birds singing in the trees, and I read Desperate Remedies there. A lot of the month I was spent finishing off, going backwards and forwards to my daughter's school, which is next to Anne Hathaway's cottage. She was finishing her A-levels, which she's now finished. We're just waiting for results now. So rather than driving backwards and forwards, I just went to the cottage and sat in the garden and read. So that was a beautiful setting to sit and read my very, very first Thomas Hardy novel, which also fits the bill for one of the two challenges that I also did in June. So I have been doing my own challenge, the Candy Reading Challenge 2025, but I've also been taking part in the Read Good Challenge as well. Now the Read Good Challenge prompt for June was Shame Forgiveness Month, and I felt a bit ashamed that at nearly 57 years old I had never read a Thomas Hardy book ever. So this fitted my Shame Forgiveness Month challenge prompt as well. So what did I think of my first Thomas Hardy read? I absolutely loved it. I was so surprised actually by how beautiful the writing is, how gorgeous the descriptions are, how exciting the book was, and how it felt like this was everything that I wanted Wilkie Collins to be and wasn't. So it was just a great sensation novel, part love story, part sensation novel, part mystery, a page turner as well, but with just some beautiful descriptive writing in there as well. So yeah, fantastic start to the Thomas Hardy read-along. I loved it. My challenge prompt for June was Juicy June, to read a big book. So I went to the biggest book I own, which is Juliet Barker's biography of the Brontes, and I have to say that I failed miserably reading this. I haven't picked it up, so I am cutting myself some slack, and I'm going to just carry on reading it throughout the rest of the year. Talking about the Brontes, that brings me to the last Readathon challenge that I took part in. So Claire Femby Warren in June announced that she was doing a Anne Brontë readathon. So the month before, in May, I had just finished reading my very first Anne Brontë novel, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and loved it. Great commentary on what happened in the Victorian age when women didn't marry well. What happened to women whose reputation was still on the line through no fault of their own, and who had to step out of conventional paths for women. Just a brilliantly interesting and fabulously written book with some of my favourite characters in. So I just finished reading this book when Claire mentioned the Anne Brontë readathon, and I thought, I can join in. Why don't I put it back to back with the other Anne Brontë novel, Agnes Grey? So that's exactly what I did, and I'm so pleased that I read these two, if not quite back to back, almost back to back, because the themes of the books really played together. I think reading one brings out the themes of the other, and vice versa. It made me realise that Anne Brontë, I think of all the Brontë sisters, talks about religion with the most zeal. She talks about work more and the need for a woman to earn her own living. In this book we've got Helen Huntington earning her living with her art. In this book the work done is work of a governess. Some of this book as an ex-primary school teacher was a little bit triggering because it follows Agnes through a number of situations where she's working for different families, and one of the families is just so terrible, and it reminded me of some wild classes that I'd taught where nothing does the trick and nothing calms the class down. And you read about that sort of experience and how tough it was for a governess within this book, but that need to just keep going. Those themes of women's work and adversity and having to rise above and just put one foot in front of the other in really difficult circumstances were all there in these two books, but really within that walking a really high religious moral high ground. The themes are there and they kind of threw a spotlight on each other, and I loved that. Now I did intend to make more videos for all of these readathons, but my time this month just got away from me with trips to London, trips for A-levels, trips out with the kids. Just things got away from me. So I am going to mention the readathon here. Hopefully at some point I'll get to an Anne Brontë video and I can link it back to the readathon. But it hasn't happened in June, but I did enjoy my time with Anne Brontë nevertheless. So that's the 3 read-alongs or readathons and the 2 challenges mentioned. For my DIY literature degree, I also managed to upload another video, which I was really pleased about, which talks about how to plan your own path through and how to make a learning plan for yourself when you've got no tutors around you. So that video went up in June, which I was really pleased about. Books that directly link to my study. I have read a little bit of the key concepts in Victorian literature. The bit that I've read, I didn't realise that the development of the train system was such a big part of the Victorian world opening up, and the train system is mentioned in books like Desperate Remedies. So it was really interesting to come across the idea of train tickets and train travel and meeting trains after reading about the train system developing in this book. It just goes to show that reading some books like this that give you like even a little bit of context, and I haven't read a lot of this book, I do only have a tiny bit of context at the moment, but even that tiny bit of context has just been fantastic. For my Charles Dickens reading as well, because my plan for my DIY literature degree is to read all of the works of Charles Dickens plus all of the works of the Brontë sisters, so that's coming on quite nicely, to be honest. But I did start in June the Old Curiosity Shop. I started this right at the end of June. I'd allocated June and July to read this, and I am going to need it because it is 700 pages long, so it is a chunky, dense book. I am currently 326 pages into it, so I still have a fair way to go of the Old Curiosity Shop, and I am really loving it. I'm also really loving reading from these old Penguin editions. I'm finding them really buttery and soft to read, and I'm loving all of the old ink plate illustrations that are throughout these books. So again, I think this is going to be right up there with David Copperfield for me. This is the fourth Charles Dickens book I've read this year. David Copperfield, A Tale of Two Cities, Bleak House, and now the Old Curiosity Shop, and oh my gosh, it's right up there. I'm really loving it. Again, a book that talks about what happens when addiction is in the mix, very similar to The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. What can happen to families and women and girls in that position? So I'm reading it with trepidation, but I am again loving every single page of this. Well, I'm hoping to get this finished soon, although I have no intention whatsoever of rushing it. I am all about savouring my books. I want to get it finished though, because I want to take part in Jane Austen July, which June I spent a lot of fun time actually planning for Jane Austen July. I haven't got to any Jane Austen reading yet, but I was thinking about my Gothic studies, and one of the prompts of Jane Austen July is to read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen. So my goal this year for my Gothic studies is to just get acquainted with the work of Anne Radcliffe, who was a contemporary of Jane Austen. So I read in January The Italian and thoroughly loved it. For me, this felt like a classic version of Lord of the Rings. The descriptions of the landscapes and the travelling through the landscape felt a little bit like Tolkien to me. The landscapes were so vast and so extreme that fits in with that idea of the Gothic, that it just took on that kind of grand adventure feel. So I really loved it, and I've been itching to get to another Anne Radcliffe. So I'd planned in, as part of Jane Austen July, to read The Romance of the Forest. And thinking about Anne Radcliffe, this book, and especially The Italian, which has a monk in it, I decided to go visiting a setting that was similar to the settings that Anne Radcliffe would have used. So one lovely sunny weekend, I packed up a picnic and took me and the kids to Wenlock Priory, which was just the most atmospheric, fantastic day out. So I even found a story about a brand new Princess, Abbess and Saint Milburga. Just a fascinating place. So this is the amazing Wenlock Priory, which reminds me so much of the priories and the tunnels in Anne Radcliffe's The Italian. It's got that same sort of Gothic atmosphere. Wenlock Priory is among one of the greatest monasteries of the Welsh Marches. Much of the surviving ruins date from the 12th and 13th centuries and have some incredible architectural features. features. It was a joint monastery for men and women, so there were monks and nuns here, and it was founded in the year 670. Isn't that incredible? It had an Anglo-Saxon princess, Milburga, as its second abbess, and the monastery was then refounded shortly after the Norman conquest. One of the most impressive structures to survive is in this cloister garden, and it's the base of a lavabo whose job was to provide water for the monks to wash their hands before they went to eat in the refectory. You can see the base of it here. Cloister lavabos were an essential feature in monastic cloisters through the 13th century, and here is an image of it, how it would have been. Two panels were surviving on the lavabo base, which you can see as I walk around. One depicts Christ's call to Peter and Andrew at the Sea of Galilee, and the other one is two apostles, possibly James and John. But it's just so incredible to see the base still there. It was discovered under a mound of earth and debris in 1878, so the Victorians unearthed this, and how exciting it would have been to have unearthed it. Another amazing feature at Wenlock Priory is the three arches leading into the chapter house. The chapter house has some incredible carvings in here. There are effigies over doorways as well. There's a lot of stone knotwork, which I absolutely love. It's just such fascinating patterns and so much work. Here you see how it would have been in the days when the monks were here. I just think it's absolutely incredible. So Wenlock's second abbess was venerated for her healing powers. She was Milburga, a Kentish princess, and she was one of at least three sisters, all of whom became abbesses and were subsequently revered as saints. So the most celebrated is Mildred, abbess of Minster in Thanet in Kent, and she was venerated at St Augustine's Abbey, which I know Julie over at Bookish Travels recently travelled to. Now, Milburga here at Wenlock, she possessed miraculous powers of healing, particularly of giving sight to the blind. She is said to have raised a child from the dead, and she had the ability to control birds, which were reported to desist from damaging crops once she had intervened. Hence, she is often symbolised by the image of geese. So this was an absolutely amazing day out, full of Anne Radcliffe setting vibes. So new books as well in June. I've already shared the Stratford-upon-Avon book haul in a video which I loved making. There were 12 books I think I got, which was fantastic, but I also found secondhand online a poetry book which I've read a few poems from in June as well. This is Anthology Poems representing Anne Shakespeare, or Anne Hathaway, or Agnes Hathaway if you've read Hamlet. So this is an anthology of different poets and poems all about Anne Hathaway, and I've absolutely loved what I've read so far of this fantastic poetry book, and I am a little bit obsessed with Anne Hathaway, so that was a really exciting happies for me in June too. As for my reading schedule, I've also really loved ticking off with purple some more boxes for my revised reading schedule. This is my reading schedule up until halfway through next year, so you can see I've got all my Thomas Hardy books that I'm ticking off. You can see there's a spoiler, I've read July's book for Thomas Hardy. We've got all the Charles Dickens. You can see I'm now working on the Old Curiosity Shop. We've got Jane Austen and Anne Radcliffe and the Brontes column in here, if you can see that, and then other Victorian literature all marked in here. So I'm slowly working my way down that list, and having a tick list for reading is just so much fun, so I'm going to mention that as well. So that's it guys for my June book happies. 2 challenges, 2 readathons, 1 read along, and lots of fantastic literature, some new books brought in as well, poetry, and lots of literary adventures. I hope you enjoyed that, and thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.